Good afternoon to you. For Telesur, I'm Regan Devines in Caracas, Venezuela. Thank you so much for being here with us on From the South. The FARC rebel group is ready to become a legal political movement in Colombia. This was announced by their chief negotiator in the peace talks taking place in Havana. Now,
We are ready to address and discuss the procedures to move from being an armed organization to becoming a political movement.
Marquez also explained that an agreement is about to be reached on the critical judicial component of the integral system of truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition. He added that the guerrilla group has submitted a package of basic proposals to the Colombian government. This has welcomed the FARC's willingness to put down their arms and become legal. A partial agreement on land reforms has already been achieved during the talks. The FARC speaker also called for a bilateral ceasefire.
We continue to try to build consensus on a ceasefire and an end to the hostilities, both bilateral and definitive, and we are making progress in the analysis of how to surrender the arms.
And for more on this, our correspondent in Colombia, Natalia Margarita, is on the line. Natalia, hi, good to see you. What have been the reactions in relation to this announcement thus far?
Hi there, Regan. Well, the reactions have been, in general, very, very positive following this announcement by the FARC that they are ready to lay down weapons and to start moving forward towards a political movement. This has triggered like the very best reactions here. Political analysts, but also Congress people have been saying that this shows that the peace process it's moving forward and that we Colombians are one step closer to this peace construction that all people here in this country have been waiting for decades, Regan.
Now, the FARC is also saying that they're seeking a consensus for a bilateral ceasefire. We know there have been unilateral ceasefires over the past year. Do you think the Colombian government is open to that?
Well, we can definitely say that the Colombian government is committed to a de-escalation of the armed confrontations, especially after the FARC implemented this latest unilateral ceasefire since the 20th of July. Exactly what the government said back then on the 20th of July in the wake of this FARC unilateral ceasefire is that they are ready to discuss the conditions and like the technical details of how this bilateral ceasefire will work in the ground. It is important to remember that there is a subcommission for what is called the end of the conflict there in Havana. And right in this subcommission for the end of the conflict, both parties involved are discussing issues like the mechanisms for monitoring and for the mechanism for verification of an eventual bilateral ceasefire. But what is true is that following this unilateral ceasefire since the 20th of July and also the suspension of airstrikes by the government, we have been experiencing here in Colombia a de-escalation of the conflict that will eventually lead to a bilateral and definitive cessation of hostilities. And I insist that is right what the subcommission for the end of the conflict is discussing there in Havana, Regan.
Now, as we just reported, the FARC said that they're becoming a political organization, moving from being an armed organization. How is this process going to work?
Well, we still need to know the detail. All what we know following the statement of the FARC yesterday is that they have submitted to the delegation of the government there in Havana, the peace delegation of the government, a proposal with the details of how this transition would be. We don't know these details. We're still waiting for the release of those details and that proposal. But something that is very interesting, Regan, is people here, analysts, social movements, social leaders have welcomed this announced by the FARC. But what they have been asking, the question they have been raising is whether the government is really prepared for this transition. because we need to remember that there has been lack of political guarantees for social movements and social leaders, especially lately here in Colombia. And in terms of this, I want to recall two specific examples that we had here in Colombian history in the past, and is one movement called the M19, who laid down weapons back in 1990. And just to give you an example, after this happened, this same year, the leader was assassinated by paramilitary groups. We also have the case of the Patriotic Union political party, who has been facing criminalization, assassinations after they laid down weapons back in 1985. So social movements here have been calling, in the wake of the latest statement on the FARC, have been calling the government to commit to the political guarantees that a group like the FARC will definitely need, these guarantees of political participation to become a political movement. In general, social activists and social movements here don't want the story of Patriotic Union or other movements that have laid down weapons to happen again, meaning to have their leaders, after laying down weapons, being assassinated by paramilitaries and state forces here. So this should be very clear, the issue of how the government is going to deal with the political guarantees once the FARC eventually lay down weapons, Regan.
Well, we've been following this for a while and we'll continue to do so. Obviously, a bilateral ceasefire, laying down of weapons, will be best, paramount for the safety of the Colombian people. Thank you so much, Natalia, again for your amazing work. We'll touch base another time.
Good day, Regan.
Moving on now, the fate of the two pilots on board a Venezuelan Air Force fighter jet that crashed after being deployed to check on an aircraft that illegally entered the country's airspace is currently unclear. The foreign aircraft is believed to have entered from Colombia through the northwestern region of Venezuela. Officials have been patrolling on high alert as the region is heavily used by Colombian paramilitaries to smuggle cocaine through Venezuela to Central America and the Caribbean. An investigation has been launched to determine why the Venezuelan Air Force jet crashed. On Thursday afternoon, Chilean President Michelle Bachelet, she visited the areas that were devastated by Wednesday's tremendous earthquake. The 8.3 magnitude earthquake was the sixth most powerful in the country's history and the strongest anywhere in the world this year. Bachelet wanted to salute the enormous cooperation of the population and was grateful that there had been relatively few victims despite the scale of the earthquake. And in the wake of the 30th anniversary of an earthquake that registered at 8.8 on the Richter scale in Mexico back in 1985, that killed at least 10,000 people, the National Center for Disaster Prevention said that about 7.4 million people and over 2 million homes in the country's capital are at high risk in the case of a powerful earthquake. Officials said that Mexico has been transformed since, and there has been progress in the construction sector. Nevertheless, they added that the government still needs to again urgently put in place measures and efforts to strengthen the institutions in charge of disaster prevention and assistance. As we approach the anniversary of the forced disappearance of 43 students in Ayotzinapa, the Mexican authorities have reported the arrest of one of the supposed masterminds behind the crime. The man has been identified as Gildardo Lopez, and he is said to be a leader of the United Warriors drug gang. He had a pending arrest warrant for kidnapping and organized crime. The arrest comes soon after a report made by independent experts distorting the government's version of students being killed and burnt in a dump. Authorities also said Thursday that a second set of remains of a student had been identified.
Until yesterday, we had the hope he was still alive, but right now, believe me, we feel a pain. That well, maybe, probably they were really burned. We do not know who took them, if they thought they were bad people, because they don't burn bad people, and we would like to think they were drug traffickers. We hope they would burn not the poor peasants who only study to be able to defend themselves, to be able to give their other family members a life.
And we have Clayton Conn now in Mexico to give us more on this last finding.
In a communique released last evening by the Argentine forensics anthropology team, which has helped to carry out a thorough forensic analysis for the parents of the 43 disappeared Ayotzinapa students, they underscored and criticized the, quote, weak and non-definitive announcement made earlier this week by Mexican authorities that the remains of a second missing Ayotzinapa student, Josivani Guerrero de la Cruz, were identified. While the team did recognize that the charred bone fragments analyzed in Innsbruck, Austria, a step recommended by the Argentine team to Mexican authorities, could possibly be those of De la Cruz, they make clear, as they had previously in February, that they could not certify or verify where the fragments were found or recovered. Now, Mexico's Attorney General's office has maintained its position that the students were killed by organized crime members, burned and their ashes dispersed in a river in the state of Guerrero. However, as we have been reporting, an independent team from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights declared that hypothesis to be scientifically impossible. Finally, in relation to these events, Mexico's Attorney General announced yesterday that one of their lead material suspects in the case, Gildardo Lopez, or the Gil, was detained in the state of Guerrero. Mexican authorities affirmed that the Gil was responsible for disappearing the 43 students. It is still unclear as to what information or new directions in the investigation will emerge. This is Clayton Conn reporting for Telesur here in Mexico City.
The United States appears to slowly be moving to open up trade with Cuba and to an easing of the blockade. The U.S. Treasury has now issued new regulations on travel, communications, business operations and banking, as well as remittances in the island. Under the new rules, U.S. companies will now be able to open up offices, stores and warehouses in Cuba. They will also be allowed to open up telecommunications and internet services between the two nations. The move comes as Washington and Havana are warming their relations. And for more on these new regulations, we head now to our correspondent in Washington, Jorge Gestoso. Jorge, are you there?
Yes, Regan, how are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. I hope you are the same as well. Well, these new regulations are a big improvement in the easing of economic deals between the U.S. and Cuba, but there's still not a blockade lifting. Is Cuba any closer to that goal, though?
That's the $64,000 question. The blockade, the embargo continues. So the easing of those rules to travel and to make business, it's a step in the right direction. We're talking that before the end of the year, there are going to be normal mail services between the two countries and also air flights on a regular basis, also ferries to go back and forth to both countries. But most definitely, and that is pretty important to point out, that the people who are going to be able to profit from this easing of the rules are 11 categories that has already been established. It's not for the average American person that now is going to become a tourist and is going to go to Cuba. It's for 11 specific categories that are already into taking place. What basically is going on is the easing of the red tape for these people that are inside those 11 categories to go there, to do business with Cubans, and so on and so forth. So it's a step in the right direction, but it's not the end of the embargo, and it's not the end of any type of regulations between the two countries.
Now we keep hearing about these companies that will be going to Cuba. Ultimately, the American companies will benefit most from this. How are all these changes going to affect Cubans?
Well, most definitely, depending on who you want to listen, Regan, you know that each coin has two sides. So if you are from the Cuban side, you're here that they're going to benefit certain people. If you live in the States or you're here in Washington, you're going to hear another side of the story. What we are hearing here in Washington is that the effort of the U.S. government has a final objective of strengthen the private sector of Cuba, because they're going to be able to at least to triple the remittances are going to be able to send the relatives here, living here in the States, to their relatives in Cuba, and therefore they're going to have more chances to invest in private entrepreneurs. And on the same hand, the idea of the US government is saying we're going to be able to sell more computers, internet equipment, telephones, etc., etc. So going to, in a way, contribute to break the isolation of some part of the Cuban public. And therefore, what we are hearing here in Washington is that is going to help to have more options, to have more quote-unquote freedom according to the version here. So depending on what you want to hear is what is going to be benefit.
Thanks so much, Jorge. Always great getting your perspective. We'll chat another time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Moving on now, Pope Francis arrives this Saturday in Cuba and will offer a mass beneath the portrait of Che Guevara on Revolution Square in Havana. One of the daughters, though, of the Argentine, Aleida Guevara, who is an adamant atheist, said she is willing to come to welcome the pontiff to the island, but she will not attend the mass, as has been demanded by the Communist Party. Aleida Guevara accused the Catholic Church of being largely responsible for many of today's problems and for the obscurantism and the oppression that, according to her, has reached the American people.
The Catholic Church was largely complicit in the murder and disappearance of more than 30,000 Argentines. That's the reality. So we cannot change history. I do not know where the Pope was at the time. I really do not know what he did. I don't even want to look into it. I don't want to be disappointed. In this regard, I give him the benefit of the doubt.
Bolivian President Evo Morales paid a visit to his Argentine counterpart, Cristina Fernandez, in a one-day visit to her country. This after spending the day with presidential candidate, the governor of the province of Buenos Aires, Daniel Scioli. Morales met with Scioli at a rally in the provincial capital of La Plata, accompanied by his foreign minister, David Choquehuanca. Scioli is first in the opinion polls for the elections set for October 25th. He is ahead of opposition leader and current Buenos Aires mayor, Mauricio Macri. Next, we visit Peru, where workers' rights seem to be non-existent for those who transport food that feeds citizens. Telesur's Rael Mora filed this report.
Benito Alarcón has been a stevedore for 29 years at the largest food wholesaler in Peru, which serves most markets for the almost 10 million residents of the capital of Lima. Like for most of his peers, his job consists of carrying large bags of vegetables weighing over 100 kilos from the trucks to the stalls. The weight carried is over twice the amount legally permitted, and it puts the health of the worker at risk.
I climbed up this one board and it slipped, and I fell with everything, the board and the mesh bag. The mesh hit me on my heel and on my ankle, and it swelled like a ball, and I couldn't work for practically a month. And for that month off, there is no government support or anything for us, the working class.
In addition to occupational hazards from carrying large weights in excess of 5 hours a day, over time, these stevedores develop permanent spine, knees, and ankle complications, and many end up handicapped. Also, they do not receive paid sick leave, health and occupational insurances, or any other type of social benefits.
The state has to intervene, subsidizing or making the law be obeyed. Nothing else, because at the root of the problem there is the health, and that is the most important part. Human life before economic benefit. That is what it's all about, the essence of it all.
The stevedores are conscious of the dangers they are facing at work, and they are preparing to take action. Through the labor union, they are holding an organizing conference, strategizing to increase their numbers and push the government to make regulations that affect their livelihoods be respected. Rael Mora, Telesur, Peru.
Greece's elections will take place this Sunday, and the race between Syriza and the New Democracy Party is very close. More on this next.
Facts that have marked the course of history. Productions designed in the English language and made for the English-speaking world. This is Documentary. Watch it on telesur.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there.
Discover Latin America and the world in our programs. Telesur Reports, The Real USA, the stories behind the tweets. Ataman, Lives, Know Your Body, Open Files. Exposing the conflicts that affect our people. Compelling personal stories and the most controversial events. See it all on telesurtv.net in English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there. An insight into Africa today with Bill Fletcher. The Global African, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there.
Thanks for sticking with us. Now, refugees exhausted from fleeing war and economic hardship have to face yet another roadblock on their journey to Western Europe. After only 2 days, Croatia has closed 7 of its 8 border crossings to Serbia, claiming that their capabilities to take in more refugees are saturated. According to Croatia's Interior Minister, over 13,000 refugees have been registered there. Meanwhile, Serbia is protesting the move and has threatened to take Croatia to international courts if the borders remain closed. Who are in Croatia, their frustrations build as they are made to wait long hours for transport. The UN's refugee agency, the UNHCR, echoed the call that Europe must come together.
What can solve this problem? Europe coming together. Countries should stop sort of tossing up these refugees from closing one border and then them reappearing at a different border point. They need to have a European solution. I mean, when these people, desperate people, come from Afghanistan, Syria and Iraq seeking help over here, they should be helped. You know, these countries have legal and moral obligations to assist a refugee population. Europe shouldn't be shutting its doors on these desperate people.
Additionally, Turkey's deputy prime minister said that they are willing to help refugees get to their destination once Europe is willing to accommodate them. Numan Kurtulmuş said that Turkey was uneasy about letting migrants continue their journey due to the recent clashes at Hungary's borders.
If the European countries are willing to take the refugees, if they can give us numbers, I can clearly say that we will put them on a plane and send them to the countries they want to live in, without letting them suffer and be exposed to smoke grenades and water cannons on borders.
And Libyan authorities have arrested 124 refugees, including 8 women near Tripoli. According to a Coast Guard official, the African refugees were preparing to cross the Mediterranean to Europe. They were then transported to a shelter in Tripoli. The arrests come after repeated incidents of migrant boats sinking off the Libyan coast, often due to overcrowding and precarious vessels. Greece is preparing for its 5th general elections in 6 years, with voters set to head for the polls on Sunday, September 20th. Polls suggest that there is a tight race between the Syriza and the New Democracy parties. The New Democracy has 30% of the votes, while Syriza has 29.5%. Alexis Tsipras became the first radical left leader to win office in the EU on an anti-austerity platform. But his U-turn deal with the country's creditors could prove a challenge to his bid for a comeback on Sunday. The UN Secretary Council has called for restraint at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, where clashes continue between Israeli forces and Palestinian worshippers for the 4th day in a row. Noor Harazin has more information on this confrontation.
It is Friday here in the Palestinian territories, and Palestinian Muslim worshippers, especially in the Palestinian-occupied city of East Jerusalem, are trying to reach the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound to participate the Islamic prayer of Friday prayer. However, clashes restarted again between Palestinian people and also Israeli police. Palestinian medical sources said that there is at least 3 people injured. There was also other clashes between Palestinians and Israelis around Qalandia, between Jerusalem and Ramallah city.
At least 3 people died in Burkina Faso on Thursday, and 60 others were injured in protests after a coup there on Wednesday. The coup took place just weeks ahead of presidential and legislative elections slated for October 11th. The elections aimed to restore democracy after the country's former leader, Blaise Compaoré, was forced out after 27 years of rule late last year. And it seems there is no end to the controversy that surrounds right-wing United States presidential candidate Donald Trump. During a rally on Thursday night, an unidentified supporter asked what Trump would do to fix the, quote, Muslim problem in the U.S. Trump responded that if he were elected president, he would look into ways to get rid of all Muslims in the country. He also came under fire for not correcting the supporter who falsely called President Barack Obama a Muslim and alleged that Obama was not even a U.S. citizen. We head to Pyongyang now, the capital of North Korea, for the 12th National Syrian Tournament, a Korean traditional type of wrestling. More than 100 competitors from around the country took part in the competition. Wrestlers need to grab a belt wrapped around the opponent's waist and thigh. The goal is to force any part of the rival's body above the knee to the ground. The champion this year received a bull as a prize at the closing ceremony. The beloved character Tintin and his faithful dog Snowy are now set to star in an opera in Belgium. The open-air musical adaptation of the Catasfiore Emerald opened on Thursday and will run until the 26th in the south of Brussels. The story tells of Tintin's series of adventures trying to recover stolen jewelry, including the precious emerald. The Beatles' first ever recording contract will go under the hammer. It is one of the around 300 lots related to the band's early years playing in Hamburg to be auctioned in New York on Friday. The contract, signed by the 4 original members of the band, has a guide price of $150,000. For more on these and other stories, please visit our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Regan Naveen. We'll have another news brief for you this evening. Thanks for watching.